Thanks for having me today. I'm a progressive blogger, so I'm going to be a little more superficial than some of the earlier comments you've heard, a little less scholarly. And I'm also going to tell a progress narrative because I believe in progress. I can remember that day 8 years ago when Scott McConnell sent me the Israel lobby over the internet. It had just been published in the London Review of Books, Steve Walton, John Mearsheimer's paper. And I was just completely stunned that such truths would be expressed. And I remember running around the house saying it's high noon for the Israel lobby. You know, I even had my 6 guns out. Since I'm going to talk about where the media are on Israel, I have to look back at that moment and say that I was really wrong. I thought that the scales were going to fall from Americans' eyes. I thought that the doors were open, the gates were open. I didn't anticipate the enormous resistance there would be to these ideas. Myself, I hadn't even been to Palestine or Israel. So I didn't understand how much censorship was going on. And so instead, I realized that it was probably around 3 in the morning for the Israel lobby. But there was sort of a hint of the dark before the dawn was sort of coming to an end. So as someone who monitors the media pretty closely on these issues, I want to relate to you first to convey how much the Israel lobby is still entrenched. And when I say Israel lobby here, I mean just a strong partisanship for Israel is still entrenched in the mainstream media. I want to just relate one day, a week ago actually, 3 different news accounts that came across my screen that I blogged about. One was that Wolf Blitzer had Michael Oren on CNN and presented Oren as, our new CNN analyst. And Michael Oren is a former ambassador for Israel, and he is moved to Israel from, I think, upstate New York, and a true believer, a Zionist zealot, really. And here he is presented as an analyst on CNN by Wolf Blitzer, who I think is someone who's waking up on the issue, but used to work at AIPAC or for a journal that was associated with AIPAC as a young man. And Oren was saying, I should emphasize what Oren was saying, he was saying that Palestinians must not go, if the two-state process, peace process fails, Palestinians must not go to international forums. They must not exercise that. So he was saying these people have no rights in international fora. They should not take any of their powers. And he's saying this to Wolf Blitzer without contradiction. And this is presented as analysis of the two-state solution or the peace process. The same day, I was sent 2 links to Hadassah magazine, which I hadn't really read until that day, I have to say. I think I have to get a subscription. In one of them, Ari Shavit, an Israeli writer who recently had a triumphant book tour to the United States. He was just sort of celebrated everywhere. He was celebrated on Charlie Rose, he was on Fresh Air, he was the 92nd Street Y. I think his book was excerpted in the New Yorker, and he got these, I think it was on the front page of the New York Times Book Review too. But Shavit is just a unreconstructed Zionist. I mean, he's a reconstructed Zionist. He acknowledges the Nakba. He acknowledges that Palestinians were dispossessed, but it's all a miraculous narrative. He uses the word miracle to describe Israel. Israel is a miracle in Shavit's rendition. And here he said that he was talking to Hadassah magazine about this incredible month. It was just a joyful month for him here. And he said that this came about because of, in part because of foremention. He was using the Hebrew or Yiddish word for man, plural, mention, foremention. David Remnick, Leon Wieseltier, Tom Friedman, and Jeffrey Goldberg. So he was referring to these kind of very powerful journalists who had played such a role in embracing him and celebrating him. And it was a frank description of the degree to which people who are have a very positive view of Zionism and of Israel, and in Wieseltier and Jeffrey Goldberg's case are really right-wing Zionists, the degree to which they play a central role still in our media. The other piece in Hadassah magazine was one in which they interviewed Jody Rudoren of the New York Times, and she said that she talked all about her Jewish background, and she said that she had gone to Israel first with United Synagogue Youth as a girl, and that she has come to this issue with great knowledge of the American Jewish experience and the Jewish-Israeli side of the conflict. Which is really, I mean, it's a tragic kind of admission from my standpoint because, especially as it's borne out by her coverage, because this is not someone who has extended herself to the other narrative. She knows this narrative. She's saying, this is the narrative I came with. And as it turns out, if you look at her coverage, she has not really extended herself. She's really operated inside this comfort zone in what I've called a sort of culturally bound fashion. And she was sort of, the tragedy from my standpoint is that the New York Times would send someone over to this area who has this background, who just uninterrogated. It's okay, everyone has a background, but in her case, it seems so uninterrogated. Now, this is all familiar terrain to you, and I should just emphasize that Rudoren lately, in describing the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, characterized it as, said, you know, many are comparing it in Israel to the Nazi boycotts of Jewish businesses. So she was using this highly inflammatory language to describe this very powerful movement for Palestinian rights, which I thought was biased. All of you are familiar with this terrain, or you would not be here. I think so. I don't need to go over and over it. The thing that I now want to move to is the kind of more positive developments that we're seeing, even within this. And I'm focused here on the elites, the mainstream elites, because I think they're significant in the end. I mean, there are many people from the grassroots here. There are many people from the Washington establishment, sort of a more marginalized Washington establishment. I'm more from the grassroots now, and all these are powerful elements, but they're not the sort of mainstream establishment elite. So 3 positive statements that indicate the sort of changes that we're beginning to witness. Tom Friedman said, in a column, he described the Congress as being bought and paid for by the Israel lobby. He said this last year or so. And he could not, to make that type of assertion, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, you were just branded as anti-Semitic. Now, of course, he has J-positive blood, so he gets a break. But no, he is making an assertion that was just beyond the pale, I think, a few years ago. And he's doing it because he is honest. There is an honest component to Tom Friedman. And he knows what's going on. He he was speaking at Oxford last year, and he said that when someone was an interlocutor, I think a scholar at Oxford was asking, why does the Israel lobby have such power? And he referred to George Bush's loss in 1992 when Bill Clinton ran to his right on settlements. And he said that his son absorbed the lesson of that. You know, you can't go too far right on the Israel question, and that's what our politicians understand. He was describing the power of the Israel lobby. It was a very good statement. He hasn't written that up, unfortunately. Another thing that I would point to is a review of John Judas's book on Truman that's coming out in the New York Times. that's very positive. And John Judas's book about Truman is all about how Truman was for the separation of church and state and folded on that because of the power of the lobby. And this piece in the Times frankly describes the power of the lobby without any kind of bias, or, I mean, he doesn't share Judas's view, but it's a fair review. The question, what is happening and why are these changes taking place? I think the first thing I'd refer to is, of course, the internet, which has changed everything, has changed all our lives. I remember 10 years ago I was here covering a congressional hearing for a magazine when I was in the mainstream media. I was making a lot of money for this article. I'd get $10,000 for covering this hearing and doing a piece on the anti-war movement. And at this hearing, there were 3 bloggers there who were making nothing. And I was just confused by this. And I met Craig Newmark of Craigslist soon after. And I said, Craig, there's something wrong with this model. I'm getting 10,000. These 3 people are getting 0. The money's got to be averaged out. There's something wrong. And he said, there's nothing wrong with the model. And he said, these 3 people are all getting something out of what they're doing. And I really hadn't thought about it. He said, one is being entrepreneurial, one is having freedom, one is supporting a cause, one is these people are using the First Amendment and not worrying about how much money they're going to make off it. And the surprise to me is that in the last 10 years I've switched sides. I'm one of those 3 people now. And I've broken out of that sort of elite mindset, and there's been a lot of freedom, and that's happening with many journalists. And many journalists are beginning to understand what great stories there are in covering the Israel lobby. I'll leave, I'm coming down to the end of my time, so I'll leave out the tribal piece. I was going to get into the whole Jewish piece of this, the degree to which Jewish life is changing. Alan addressed this. But to the extent that Jewish life is changing, it has given other people, because there is an element of a deference for many reasons, including the donors and the voters and the Hammerlock. There's deference to the Jewish community inside the American establishment. And because that Jewish community is now beginning to fracture openly, that is giving people permission to talk about it. That's one piece. The other piece I'd mention, though, is, and I think that journalists are also understanding that these are great stories. I think that any journalist who came here today and listened today will understand what just amazing stories there are if you look back over the history of the Israel lobby, from the silencing of Sobran to the USS Liberty attack to, I think about James Forrestal's death in the 1950s, why he went mad, the Balfour Declaration. I mean, there's just this very rich history that John Judas has treated in his book, but that all journalists who love stories, I think we're going to see more and more of that, and that's when we'll finally see the high noon for the Israel lobby. Thank you.